Can I welcome to the stage Kenny Cameron, who's the Managing Director of Connect Response. Really interested to see how this goes, Kenny, and the, I think, innovation that you've come up with. So over to you.
Good morning. My name's Kenny Cameron. As Russell has said there, I'm one of the co-founders of Connected Response. We set the business up 5 years ago. It was 10 years in the making, though, because all the technology we have started in a 100 million turnover meter asset manager. Where I worked, we developed technology for social housing, actually with Westminster City Council, but it was never taken to market. So the business was formed to take technology that was there into a new market, not just in London, but across different parts of the country. The focus for us has been about taking storage heating, which is incredibly maligned with good reason, because storage heating has been an invention in the UK for the last 40 years that generally has delivered bad heating experience for tenants. Not because storage heating can't work, but because for 40 years we've charged them at times to suit the electricity industry, not to suit the people that should be benefiting from the heating. Storage heating was an invention to get rid of nighttime surplus nuclear generation. So it was quite an unashamed attempt by the electricity industry to dump something they didn't need and pretend it was a heating system. And I'm not making that up. There's long-serving people in the electricity industry that would freely admit that. So the concept was to try and do things better than they were before with existing heaters, to make people more comfortable, help them reduce their bills, and also to contribute towards decarbonisation. The picture in the photograph there is from my home city. It's not where I live now, but it's from Glasgow. And I put that in because it shows the types of houses in an urban environment where you'd find storage heating. It would be tower blocks, it would be low-rise surrounding the tower blocks. Of course, if you go into rural areas where there's no gas, then you could find storage heating in bungalows and houses across the country. Let me see which button to press here. There we go. And the problem with storage heating is that 99% of people in the country are on tariffs that are either Economy 7 or based in Economy 7. The concept of charging storage heaters for up to 7 hours a night, and that's a 24-hour day there, from midnight at one end on the left to midnight on the right along the bottom. And that's what happens when you put a big block of charging at night. You heat the storage heaters during the night. The blue line is the living room temperature, and the average temperature in a house that gets Economy 7 peaks at 8:30 in the morning. And that's not from making that up, that's from actual numbers we have from monitoring equipment in flats. So it's pretty bad, and the effect of that is if it's cold outside, then that temperature declines gradually through the day, more rapidly on cold days, of course. And what you're trying to avoid is the situation where in the late afternoon and the evening, the house gets cold and people drop to maybe 17, 18 degrees. And that's not uncommon. So that's the problem. It's not the heater. The heater that we all talk about is night storage heaters. And of course, storage heaters don't know what time it is, so they'll take heat whenever you give it to them. So that's the problem that we've been trying to solve for a number of years. We've been doing a project in Glasgow with Wheatley Homes Glasgow, formerly called Glasgow Housing Association, and that was to try and help them to do something positive for their 10,000 flats across Glasgow with storage heating, split roughly 80-20 between the multis and the low-rise. The breakthrough moment, light bulb moment for me back in early 2021 was we sat with their head of asset investment, and we realised his decision was going to be, do we invest in new storage heaters, or do we invest in new controls in those flats with storage heaters? And I asked him the question, which was, how often do you intend to replace heaters? And he says, well, we're working on a programme to try and replace them gradually, and we've got money to do 1 tower block per year. And immediately I was thinking, you've got 132 tower blocks. So that doesn't sound as though it's going to happen very quickly. You'll have knocked them down before you've replaced many of the storage heaters. So straight away we knew there was a win-win, and they embarked on a programme there to put smart controls into all 10,000 flats, and they are 80% through that now. We've done that with their direct labour organisation, City Building, who are a joint venture between Wheatley and Glasgow City Council. It's the former Works Department of the Council. And it's interesting to share it in this environment because I went into it quite negatively. I'd previously worked with City Building on a project several years ago where they were collaborating, or should I say not collaborating, with Keep Moats, a very tense organisation between two rival organisations. But I've got to say it's been a great relationship we've formed with City Building. We have made every appointment for them, so we've made all 8,000 appointments. We've managed that as part of the contract, and they've then gone and delivered, and we've communicated directly with their on-site electricians. The smart controls were aimed at doing a number of things, but firstly, to try and charge at times to suit the tenant. Secondly, to give people more heat on a cold day and less heat on a mild day. That might sound very obvious if you've never lived with storage heating, but storage heaters traditionally charge all night, every night, until the bricks get warm and the thermostat turns the heat off. So this was about trying to say, we'll give them what they need. And one of the moments when the executive team of Wheatley realised the importance of what we were doing was we met with them a year ago in November, and it was 14 degrees in Glasgow that day, and in advance we had checked when the average switch on time was that evening, and it was 4:24 in the morning. And that's when I think the penny dropped for that management team, that people's heaters charged from 4:24 till about 7:30. The previous year, the heaters would have come on at 11:30 at night, and by mid-morning there was loads of open windows letting the heat out the flats. People had bought heat during the night and were letting it evaporate into the air the following morning. The other thing that we want to do, it says they eliminate the need for electric fires, because that's been the pattern. People get the bricks heated at night. When they're cold in the evening, they put on an electric fire on the most expensive part of the tariff. The cost of doing what we're doing has been typically around about £800 a flat, and that's been including the installation. So it's proved to be good value for money against a replacement of new heaters, anything ranging from about £5,000 to £8,000 per flat. The other saving in that, of course, is that we're not throwing thousands of heaters out onto landfill. The project began with the landlord setting aside money to replace 5% of heaters if there was old heaters there that were written off by the installer. The actual replacement was 0.5%, so it was a really minimal expenditure. And their average age of heaters when we started was 18 to 23 years old. That might shock you to think, are landlords still keeping those heaters going? But the view they took was, if the heater's working, we're not replacing it, we're charging it at better times. That's what's installed in the flat. It's not very exciting. It's on the right-hand side, a smart controller that has two 100-amp contactors, one that controls the hot water, one that controls the heating, and in the living room, a temperature and humidity sensor that gives us feedback on whether we are delivering the service that's expected by the tenant. In a multi-dwelling unit application, the communications is run using a gateway, which is discreetly put into the building somewhere in an electrical cupboard, and using low-power radio, it's communicating to and from the switches and the temperature sensors. The install in the flat only takes about 45 minutes. And by working with the direct labour team, the advantage in that is they are not only the installers, but in another part of their business, they are the maintenance guys. And maintenance is important because it's very naive to think you can go into a house and everything will be perfect. There's always consumer units that need work done, or other things that are unexpected. And that's been the great advantage of working with the team who are familiar to the tenant and are authorised to do other work when they're there if there's any remedial work required. The tariffs is a massive area where there needs to be continued change. I said earlier, almost everyone is still on night charging. We've been able in Scotland to get 1,000 people so far, 1,000 of the 8,000 onto a new tariff, which is also an old tariff, Economy 10, which means people get 3 charging times during the day. So instead in the top wheel there, getting a big block of charge at night and then probably having to put the electric fire on in the orange blob at the bottom, giving them 3 times when the heater can charge, not by their choice, not by their intervention, but in an automated fashion. So the tenants, I've got to say, tenants generally don't understand this. I've kind of given up on expecting that tenants will really understand what we're doing. I don't say that to be patronising, because I've often been in people's houses. 2 years ago, we tell them we will charge your heaters for longer on a cold night, and they understand it. And then 2 years later, when there's a VIP coming in, and I'll say, remember, it'd be good for you to explain that it charges at different times every night. And even the most intelligent people often say, oh, really? Is that what happens? So it's proof that the tenants don't care about the technology. They don't care how it works. They just want to be warm. And we shouldn't really expect, too much of any of them, because people have many other things going on in their lives. Time of use tariffs is an area that we spend a lot of time lobbying Ofgem, lobbying government to say, don't allow suppliers to focus on developing tariffs for middle-class early adopters, tariffs for electric vehicles, for batteries, for solar. Unfortunately, that's where all the work's going on. And we are pushing hard to try and say there should be more flexible tariffs. One of the part-time jobs that Joe has across there, Joe Whittle, is he's involved in an initiative in Ireland called Energy Cloud Ireland, which is about trying to take surplus wind and give it away to the poorest people in society. And that's been done for 2 years in Ireland. We're doing a mirror image of that in Scotland now, which is to say, don't, as a country, spend millions of pounds paying wind farms to switch off. Just give it away to people that can take it and use it. And to do that, you need more creative tariffs. I talked about the problem of Economy 7. That's how the Economy 10 looks in contrast. So think of it as, instead of the big blob of blue to the left, is split into the blobs of red, closer to when they wake up, middle of the afternoon as well. And what you do is create a much smoother temperature profile, so you don't have the peaking too early, and you have the ability to watch television at night without having to either go to bed early or put a jacket on or switch on an electric fire. This is some of the statistics from Wheatley Group that in their interim report to Scottish Government, who part-funded, showing how much they've saved just by charging according to the weather, how much they've saved in terms of people's individual bills as an average, and also what contribution it's made to reducing the carbon emissions for the group as a whole. That's just some of many, many quotes from customers. Some are less polite than that. The one on the left there is a polite one when people say what they think of their storage heating at the beginning of a project. And the one at the right, and many interviews that we do with them, is it's often the most surprising things that people tell you. We've just done a video for publication, and there's one lady in her early 50s, and she was most excited by saying, my brother even comes to visit me now. He never came before. Now he'll come at night because my house is warm. So things that are not that obvious in terms of the social benefit you can learn by getting good customer feedback. I want to finish by just briefly talking about an organisation in another part of the country, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. Someone earlier on was asking me what it was like working with them post-Grenfell, and it's actually been good. I've worked with them before and after. If there was any observation I'd make, is they're so tenant-focused now that they sometimes do things at a slow pace because they always want to check what the tenants, what the leaseholders will think about it. We began working with them in this project in 2020. At that time, they charged all the storage heaters every night. Even in the summer, if people left the heaters on, and some did, then they got a full night charge. They got a full tank of hot water, even if their flat didn't have a bath and had an electric shower. So massive overconsumption, and some tenants who took advantage and others who complained about those that took advantage. So the project kicked off then. The tower block, I'm not sure if any of you recognise it. It's often described as the ugliest tower block in London or the most beautiful, depends on your point of view. I think it's quite an attractive building, but I'm biased, having spent a lot of time in it. So Trellick Tower, that was the conditions before. And what the landlord wanted to do was to reduce the waste, because they knew there was massive waste. Waste in turn would reduce people's bills. They wanted to improve the heating experience by not putting all the charge in during the night. And they wanted in the future's still not quite arrived, they wanted to be able to align the charging with renewable energy, because they knew that that made sense. We're actually just about to start a project that will every night charge the heating at slightly different times dependent on the carbon intensity of the grid in London. So it's a project to track how much fossil fuel generation is happening tonight. Is it at 3 in the morning? Is it 4 in the morning? So that our system can say, do we care whether we charge at 3 or 4? And if the answer to that is no, then to be able to flex every night. The predictions are it will reduce carbon emissions in that block by 14%. So to those who are targeted to do that, very exciting proposition. The project that we did was in 3 phases. It could have been in 1 phase. It would have saved them more money if they'd done it all together, but the conservatism I hinted at earlier meant that they started by saying before we charged everyone during the night for 7 hours. The first phase, they said, let's put the controls in and we'll give people 3 charges, nighttime, afternoon and evening. The second phase was to say, once we've done that, let's switch on the weather compensation and give them a lesser charge or a longer charge as appropriate. And the third part, which happened maybe 9 months to a year later, was saying, we're massively over-providing in hot water. This, I should have said, was a heat with rent scheme. So it's a managed service where people get the service and pay a flat charge every month for it. So they said, do you think they would notice if we gave them less hot water? And we were sure they wouldn't, because they were giving probably 6-7 hours of hot water at one stage, and the landlord we deal with in Glasgow was recommending 2 hours. So we knew people were happy with 2 hours when they had a shower in the flat. All they needed hot water for was to wash hands and wash dishes. So we knew it was fairly safe to wind that back a bit, and that's what they did. The consequence of that was that we had half-hourly metering on all 217 flats, so we now have 3.5 years of data saying, what does it look like? What did we save? Did it impact on room temperatures? Don't worry about trying to understand this, but this was just for a typical flat 6, anonymised flat 6, to say, how much energy did we consume on the left-hand margin, that's consumption up the left, and how did that compare with what the outside temperature, so that's going up to sort of 20 degrees along on the bottom axis. So we could plot what happened at each phase of the project. We then could say, what does that look like in aggregate? I'm not asking you to consume that either, but we took the half-hourly data and said, that's what it looks like as an average. You'll see in the average, there's lots of blue spiking in the summer, because there are some days when people do want the heating on, even in London in the summer. But if we averaged it out over months, then what this graph tells us is that the yellow line that's peaking up in the middle says, of course, it gets warm in the summer. And it says on the left-hand side, it gets colder in January than it does in December. So that's the outside temperature. The blue line shows us that people keep the heating on into the shoulder seasons of spring and autumn for much longer than they need to. There are people that will keep the heating on and open windows if they can get away with it. So that was the bit that we're trying to change. We switched the weather compensation on, which is the brown line, the first of the sloping lines, and then the grey line, which you probably can't see as a colour, was then optimising the hot water. So it gave us 3 phases to say, what difference does that make? The box at the right-hand side gives you the breakdown of that. The weather compensation, charging appropriate to need, reduced consumption by 24%, and then optimising the hot water added an 11% onto that. So big savings that were reductions for the landlord, which they in turn are able to pass on through the following year's heating and hot water charge. And the saving was that area under the curve. That was the area where they'd made significant savings, because they weren't allowing people to keep the heating on and open the window. The savings on bills, estimated there about £800 for that group of flats. That, of course, depends on what tariff they're on. Their savings there would actually have been higher in a normal year, but of course we've not been living in normal years for the last 2 years. It's been so much dependent on when tariffs were renewed with energy suppliers. So that's a race through some of the things we've been doing. I would sort of leave you, this won't be relevant to all of you, but to those that sit in organisations that would still have electric heating, and to put that in context, storage heating is found in 1.5 million houses across Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So there's still a lot of it out there, ranging from cities like Glasgow, where it's about 12%, to London's about 8 to 10%. So big variations, but if it's relevant to you, it'd be great to tell you more about it and give you some insight into how we can not throw the baby out the bathwater in the sense that storage heating is maligned, but we should be looking at how we're using it, not how it's currently delivering. So happy to take any questions now or talk to you in the breaks.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Kenny. Any questions from anyone?
Kenny, thank you very much for that fascinating presentation. The beauty is in the simplicity, and it's like looking at the future tomorrow, and why didn't we have that today? And lo and behold, we do. So brilliant, thank you very much.
Okay.
My question is, how's it been dealing with the generators, the distributors, and the retailers to get them on board with all this?
It's variable. The 6 network owners in Great Britain, UK Power Networks, Spain, and Western Power, and so on, have been reasonably good to deal with because they have innovation teams that are really constantly looking at what we can do differently. We did a project a couple of years ago with Scottish Power Energy Networks that was more relevant now than it was then, but that was saying if there's 100 people living in a tower block and about 40 of them have cars, and that's about fairly accurate as an average, what's going to happen when those 40 cars are all electric vehicles? They can't all switch their cars on to charge off that local substation at 11 o'clock at night when the heaters are surging on. So there's a realisation as network owners that storage heating is actually part of the solution, and that we shouldn't be just taking storage heating out and replacing it with heat pumps, because many of the property types will never be suitable for heat pumps in terms of there's nowhere to put them. So the DNOs, the distribution network owners, have been good. I'd be much more critical of energy suppliers because most of them have focused quite blatantly on the middle class customers I talked about earlier on. Been very little tariff development. I'd be critical of Ofgem as well, and we've told Ofgem that Ofgem should make it mandatory for all suppliers to have tariffs appropriate to this sector. We shouldn't be ignoring 1.5 million people. They should be at the vanguard of drive to net zero, rather than paying higher prices than the rest. You may or may not know, but Economy 7 tariffs are quite strange in that you would say to somebody, we'll give you 15 pence for your night charging and 30 pence for the day. But what they don't tell you is, by the way, your neighbour across the street that's got gas is only paying 27 pence in the day. So it's always been a give with one hand, take away with the other mentality. So suppliers is much more of a problem area, and we're starting to see signs that Ofgem are going to try and apply a bit more pressure there.
Thank you.
Anybody else got any questions for Kenny? I have. Liz?
You mentioned around the sensors measuring humidity.
Yeah.
So is there any workaround with that around early intervention with damp and mould?
There's not as much work as we'd like there to be. We originally designed the sensor as temperature and humidity sensor with an abstract belief that at some point humidity might be relevant to our clients, but 4 or 5 years ago that it wasn't clear whether there was an appetite for that information. So we've now got it for the 8,000 flats in Glasgow. We're probably in a position where the landlord views it as too much information, because just knowing you've got 8,000 sets of humidity data means nothing unless you've agreed what the alert levels are. Do you want to know if somebody breaches a level 10 times a month or once in a month? So there's some work going on now to try and work out the dew point and to understand why humidity is high, look and see, is it time of day related, is it what people are doing, are they drying clothes, are they cooking, are they not opening windows? So it's now become, post-Rochdale, much more relevant to what's going on. So I think to any landlords that got a big portfolio of electric heating stock, then this is a great solution to be able to zoom in on that and solve one problem and identify another at the same time.
Yeah, we do have quite a few properties with electric storage,
Yeah.
so it may be a
It'd be
conversation.
good to tell you about that,
Yeah.
tell you more about it. And because we've been a start-up 5 years ago and quite a small team, we've tended to go where there was opportunity that found us. And Wheatley are the biggest landlord in Great Britain in terms of electric heating stock. And if the number one comes along and says, we want to do it all, we've done it. My regret on that 5 years on is we've not been as active elsewhere as we'd like to have been, but that's starting to change now.
You just need to come down the A1 slightly and drop off to Yorkshire.
Yeah, well, home is Sheffield for me, so I probably don't need to go very far at all. So it'd be great to talk to you. I might sound as though I'm from Glasgow, and I am, but Sheffield's been home for 30 years, so.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Your accent needs to change.
No, I know. My children's accents are completely different. Whenever they come home and they're complaining about the gas engineer, the alarm engineer are complaining about scheduling and bad scheduling, then they're talking in a Yorkshire accent. Okay, so very happy to take any other questions in the breaks if any of you have any. Okay, so.
Kenny, just on that, just a bit of trivia on Trellick Towers, obviously designed by Enzo Goldfinger.
Yeah.
Who certainly Ian Fleming didn't like his architecture, and hence Goldfinger being one of his baddies, yeah.
That's right. I got a Christmas present from one of my colleagues called Lobenberg or some name like that, and Goldfinger, and it was a history of these two Eastern European architects who designed buildings like that. So, but it's a fascinating building. It's got lovely features inside. It's not what you'd expect. Yeah, it's a good story, that one.
Brilliant.
We often have lunch in the Goldfinger Cafe in the basement of the block. So.
Yeah, I know it well. No, it is a fantastic building. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Can we show appreciation to Kenny, please?
Okay,
Thanks ever so much. Thank you.